Warning: the following video contains references to violence, character death, physical and psychological torture, body horror, trauma, animal cruelty, human trafficking, war hamsters, all of the triggering stuff today, guys. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey guys, I'm V for Verbatim, and I'm marching to the beat of my own drum, whether I have subscribers or not. Today's another retrospective video for my game show series, and there's not going to be much fanfare for this beginning bit. I implore you to watch the first one so you're caught up, and I promise that's not me trying to get you to watch my videos. With a 5-part series like this, I just don't want to bore people with a recap for every single video. So have you watched part 1 yet? Good. Let's get into the next 4 characters, all from the previously mentioned lost episode. I hope you guys enjoy. World building vocabs you're going to want to remember for this video should be short, but we're going to discuss 2 more timelines as well, so this might turn out to be long again. I apologize in advance. First, blood hybrids in Flash's family tree. Just a recap from past videos.
Pelargarian royals are the planets their ancestors live on, but there are several notable illegitimate children of the Pelargarian royal line, created as a result of crossing species. They're what I call blood hybrids, which are different from an actual species called hybrids that are very similar. They typically take on Pelargarian forms until later in life when their bodies contort and become unnatural combinations of both species. It's usually painful, but psychological damage is the main thing for these guys. Being abandoned by their ancestors for something they can't control, like blood purity, has left some of them anguished, some of them desperate for affection, and some of them even bitter enough to conquer planets to prove their own legitimacy.
That said, the family tree of the Pelargarian royal line, all blood hybrids included, is extensive and not entirely documented by me, so here's just a comprehensive list of characters that actually matter and we'll get back to in upcoming videos. As a word of warning, the names of all the Pelargarian royals are remnants of my 10-year-old self, but because of the sacredness of my beginning stories, and because I still kind of find them funny, I won't be changing them for now. We start strong with King Tutufufu, the eldest planet. He's dead, but his planet itself has become an Egyptian-style desert planet where his calcified flesh and organs are harvested as resources by marauders. Cairo 1, the Marauders of Ra, and the Absconded could honestly be an entirely separate video, but moving on. He had one legitimate son, later King Mr. Chubbyface, and his most significant blood hybrid child is called Micron or Prism as of now. King Mr. Chubbyface is still a living planet and second capital for the Pelargarian Empire. He had 2 legitimate sons called King Mr. Chubbles and Prime Minister Flabbyface. His most notable blood hybrid child was an unnamed character that we'll be building from the ground up in the next video. Flabbyface is the younger of the siblings and hasn't yet birthed an heir. He only has one child, a blood hybrid named Zimue. You can learn more about him in the Pride Month redraws I did back in June. Chubbles had 3 significant sons, only one of them legitimate, the middle child Flash. The other 2 are blood hybrids named Chaos and Sebastian, and the second name may sound familiar if you watched my first story redraw, since the person assigned to watch over Flash's children in another timeline was a butler named Sebastian. Sebastian Fawnsworth, specifically. I will admit, Speedy/Sebastian was not officially Flash's half-brother until I confirmed with my sister, who technically created the character. After consulting with her, I take this stuff very seriously if you haven't noticed. Speedy is canonically a half-demon blood hybrid, which actually works well for this story. And now that we're 2 videos far into discussing lore, we might as well actually get into the story specifically and the lore that goes along with the story itself. It's about a game show where the host is an insane hamster man that's transforming the eliminated contestants of the games into monsters, as a sort of twisted second game exclusively for the game makers. Now that's all fine and good, but what exactly is going on behind closed doors? 4 big things. First and most obvious, physical torture. Contestants are losing limbs, and when weapons and shards of metal grow back in their place, the process is generally very painful. Then there's also biological torture and experimentation, which kind of links the first and third points. Contestants are exposed to toxins and chemicals that warp their perception of reality. It makes them easier for the game makers to control, but more difficult for outsiders to predict. The whole shards growing back in place of lost limbs is also part of some of Belial's latest trials, and if you don't know who Belial is, all you need to know is mad scientist bunny man with a side of demonic imagery. Third, psychological torture. After having limbs removed and going through chemical trials, contestants basically become prisoners that are simultaneously trained to imprison others. They're often isolated for long periods of time and are spoon-fed a new ideology in the realm of the game makers. Survival is only a guarantee for those who fight for it. Meals aren't given out equally, and rumors are spread by the game makers specifically to start fights and weed out the less capable soldiers, which is clearly anxiety-inducing. Most of the contestants dissociate often and struggle to differentiate reality from fiction. And there's the added loss of their identities. They can never go home to their families, they have no documented names, no records. They're practically ghosts since they're not even called their actual names in the games themselves. Every name the characters have in this series is a false name except for Levi's and Delphine's, since Levi has special privileges which include the underlying power of keeping his name the core of his identity. Each subject gradually forgets their true name, their past, and it's that level of loss that hits hardest, even if they aren't entirely aware of it themselves. And that actually went a little bit quicker than I thought, but now for timelines. With the first video, I went over the most passive timelines, the ones that lasted the longest with no issues. The two timelines for today are a little bit more mixed. Firstly, the era swap timeline. In this version of events, the timeline flows with the main timeline until around the 2040s, when Lucan, or Time Master, attempts to create a copy of the entire time dimension so that he and Ray can both be with the person they love in different timelines. If you don't know who Ray is, that's not important, but the event completely fractures their timeline, and heroes and villains from that period are stranded in various time periods with no memories of their past. No one dies immediately due to his actions, but the timeline is held together by chewing gum and chicken wire as a weird copy disconnected from the start of the timeline and fizzling out at its point of creation in 2044. Because it's such a unique scenario brought about by Master Time himself, the Lucan in this timeline is the most powerful. And for the main timeline, it's the timeline my stories have taken place in up until this one. It's only more dangerous because of 2057. It's statistically the most stable of all timelines, with even the paradox created by Max traveling to his own past being a relatively stable event in the grand scheme of things. That should be it for today. Let's get to the main event, character redraws. Delphi was a blind contestant with the ability to predict the future. She was brought to other colonies to prevent disasters and provide colonists with good fortune, but she often refused to use her abilities because half the time the only thing she would be able to see was the end of her timeline. I later established that she had an older brother in another timeline, and he was trying to reunite with her. She also had this weird oracle form that she entered at the height of her prophecy abilities. She died in the games when she blew up during a food challenge. Her mind was saved inside of a computer so that her powers could still be used. Delphine is a creature that's been taken advantage of her entire life. Since the moment she was born, she's had the ability to predict future events. Her and her younger brother were sold off into the intergalactic market, where they were eventually separated as Delphine was passed from person to person, all looking to take her power for their own. She was reduced to her powers and the services she could provide, hence she became a child servant for her final master. She was taken into the games by him, since he believed her powers would help him succeed. What he hadn't counted on was Delphine creating her own outcome, taking the games as her final opportunity to escape by killing the man that had kept her hostage. She made it to the 4th round and was eliminated, but she wasn't blown to pieces like in the original story. Instead, she died of some kind of poison and was brought back by the game makers. They, like others before her, saw potential in her powers, so her cycle of servitude continues, with the gamekeeper Levi being the one in charge of her, but never forcing her to use her powers despite Delphine being his prized and powerful resource. He treats her well because he cares for her, but despite this, Delphine gradually lets her powers and the serum consume her, retreating into herself because she realizes all that she is her clairvoyance. She's almost completely lost, her body simply becoming a conduit for her abilities, while Levi tries in vain to force his beloved to reciprocate his feelings. Delphine was a simple enough concept. I made her bat-like as early as her first drawing, even if she doesn't look it. Her weak eyes are part of it, but seeing as she's a little less bat in her first drawing, I looked for a bat species that was a little more dog-like, especially fruit bats. I originally had this idea to include apple blossoms in her design in reference to that and her story origins on a jungle planet. I decided instead to focus on the way I drew her in a transformed oracle state, where she was white and had long ears. To incorporate those features while retaining the bat stuff, I modeled her after a Townsend's long-eared bat, an albino one, obviously. I simplified most of the features to make her a little bit more uwu-ish. She doesn't have wings like her brother does, a drawing for a later day, but I gave her a cape that looked a little like 2 bat wings. Her limbs are all slender like a bat's, and her jumpsuit is pretty simple. But I sectioned it off close to the chest to simulate the big floofy chest that a bat species usually has. That said, I wasn't about to overly sexualize the bat lady by giving her fuzzy angel dust boobs. I went for a few extra features, a little widow's peak of gray fur, and a bit of dramatic flair to her cape, just to make her look a little Dracula, again for the bat motif. I also made her weak eyes yellow like lanterns, and though I didn't end up drawing pentagram marks on her hands like in design concepts, I did glove her hands since I would imply some kind of brand beneath the gloves that enhances her powers in some way. She's a really simple design, but since she's more of a plot device and side character here, I didn't want to go too complex, even if she has quite a bit of story to her. Smokescreen was the epitome of a background character. He never actually showed up in any of the panels of the original comic, he was mostly there to fill a spot in the roster. He was eliminated in round 2, and his arm weapons were his axes, based in part on a Powerpuff Girls grimdark story. But moving on, Smokescreen was most likely a mouse in his original drawing, or at least he was in the most recent draw that I did for the character. Smokey is still mostly a background character, and she lived a relatively average life. She's a buff lady, definitely military but not high military. But she's very comfortable with herself, down to earth, not looking to impress anyone because she knows who she is. She probably entered the game so that she could win money for her family and herself, but she's just a stable human being. She speaks up when she doesn't agree with something, which is her main function after she's eliminated in the second round. She's an equal to Mamoru and Amadea in terms of power, but she's meant to fill an administrative role and assist both of them. Like Delphine, her assistance was gifted to them when the number of prisoners became too high for just Levi, Belial, Amadea, and Mamoru to keep track of. She was told to never disclose the name of her two masters to each other because the game makers were obsessed with the drama that ensued. Smokey works for two lovers that are actively searching for each other and pining really, really hard. And it annoys Smokey when she can't just tell them how close they are to each other to make them stop. Outside of the pining, she puts things into perspective for Mamoru. He's kind of a misogynist at first, and he's a spoiled little kid at heart. So Smokey, being a strong female assistant that can and has kicked his ass, teaches him how to be less of a dick to people that are more competent than him. Conversely, Smokey is a gal pal for Amadea that helps her respect herself a little bit more. She starts pining over Mamoru less because Smokey becomes an elder figure for her to admire instead. To summarize, Smokey is just there to bring out the most human elements of these characters, their ability to grow and change. While she was impacted by the chemicals and has her own moments of misjudgment, she's ultimately a survivor and a true leader behind the haze of authority, hence the name Smokescreen. Oh, and she has a Russian accent, for no reason other than I feel like it fits her. Her design really isn't that complex. I took the colors of Amadea's armor and mixed it with the shaping and weapon of Mamoru's to give it a little bit of each design. She's on the bigger side if you haven't noticed, being a little less hippie and a little more buff. I'm trying to vary the way my characters look a little bit more, and I figured her being a little more buff would complement her sturdy personality and function in the story. The little hat she wears is kind of a way to distinguish her character, and to show that she's still civil of mind compared to everyone else. Clearly, I didn't go for the axe hands this time around. I figured that the hooks would look cooler and just a more threatening weapon than axes anyway. One last thing to add, I changed Smokey from a mouse to a chinchilla because the colors to me seemed to fit the definition of Smokey a little bit better than a mouse's coloration did. Plus it gave me a nice chance to do a more unique shape to her head and give her a little fluffle ruffle around her neck. Chinchillas are pretty large rodents anyway, which fits her silhouette perfectly when put up against characters who are meant to resemble smaller creatures. Again, pretty simple, not much to look at here, but I did enjoy fleshing her character out a bit. Fluffball was just a cross-eyed background character in the same vein as Derpy from ML... God, why can't I escape the children's programming of my childhood? Ugh. But he's just there as like a dumb goofball. Eliminated in the second round, he basically became feral after the experiments, and he used tiny metal claws as his weapon of choice. Mort is still a side character that doesn't have any significant backstory, but if I were to pull something out of my ass, Mort's a farmer that got hit in the head by one of his alien cows, but has always been lucky, surviving that accident, one that otherwise would have ended his life. He's not very bright, and his eyes occasionally cross because of his head injury. He's simple and very content, and I'd say he was entered into the games by his family so that they can make money, because he's the definition of dumb luck. He lost in round 2 because luck can only get you so far, and his hands were replaced with saws in the experiments that followed. As someone who's very cuddly, his saw hands are a source of constant suffering for him, even if he's not able to put that suffering into words. But he does his best to show his affection to others through service. He's found purpose as an assistant for Belial, the head scientist of the Game Maker's secret army. Belial is a very cold and calculated character, so Mort being this cuddly, ditzy character that bounces off of his brilliant madness is a fun dynamic. In general, Mort is just so full of love that even his inability to hug people as he once did doesn't deter him from his simple and compassionate worldview, making him a perfect foil for the Mad Dr. Belial, who appreciates his warmth more than he lets on. Mort, again, isn't very complex in design. You'll notice that his cross eyes aren't a thing anymore. Neither is his coloration. For this redesign, Mort is based on a pika, which is a really cute rodent creature that is just got the chubbiest little face. I just decided to give Mort big eyes without any extra sparkles like I sometimes do. There isn't much behind the eyes other than the infectious affectionateness. He's not as beat up looking as some of the other experiments are, but he does have a chunk and a patch of fur missing from his face, and he wears a security collar. He can't help wanting to cuddle people and make sure they're okay, so the collar senses when he's trying to hug someone and is able to stop him if he gets too close. Again, a very simple design for a side character. He's orange and wearing a nurse-like uniform since he works with Belial to match his color scheme and all that. And that's pretty much it. Simple enough, but I like the new concept for his character quite a bit, so I think that personally makes up for it for me. We're not going to talk much about his previous iterations here, mostly because this new story just kind of builds on it. But here's what he used to look like for reference. The son of the current head Pilligaran Royal and a demon, Sebastian Fawn is Flash's half-brother. He wasn't brought into the games because of his relation to Flash. He's not actually aware of their connection initially. But because of his demon-like abilities, he was personally requested by the game makers to add a little bit more drama and intrigue. He was the only main contestant brought in by Flash and not entered in willingly, but he's far from a favorite in the eyes of the public. Being from a Lost episode, Fawn is a ghost of a person, a nobody with no family or friends outside to even look for him. He's kept locked up with the other contestants instead of granted the amenities of the other champions, and is painfully aware that nobody's going to save him. In a position of constant stress and torture, his blood hybrid transformation is early, long, and painful. In his drawing, I chose to depict the beginning stages of his wings growing in, which is admittedly the most gruesome part in his transformation. Speedy later joins the ranks of the victors, but his treatment prior to that sticks with him and is his motivation behind a planned assassination attempt against the head game maker. In general, he started out as a curious, naive person that believed there's good in everyone, until he was corrupted by the incessant suffering and malicious intent around him. Not really much to take note of for his design. This is a human form he decided to take because his original form got so screwed up by the harassment he received in his isolation, mostly from Mamoru. His eye is missing, a remnant of his actions during the Lost episode, but Mamoru also strikes him in the face often for the damage Fawn did to his eye, so the dark mark over his other eye isn't biological in this timeline. His face, though human, is meant to resemble a guinea pig a little bit, and yeah, not much here honestly. He's wearing a patient gown rather than other clothes here because this is before he's allowed to walk around freely and stuff, and I had a little too much fun with the blood, I think. But here he is, my poor small bean in all of his bloody glory. Loving the blood, not so much the outfit and the details lost because of it. As we finish up here, I'll mention a few fundamental changes for this story. Originally, the story only followed the cast for the Lost episode, and was going to hint at the winner of the episode teaming up with the other past winners to take down Flash, the host of the games. That storyline is fun and all for me, but as seen in stories like The Hunger Games, The Hunt, and most recently Squid Game, the human element of the story, specifically the contestants, is important in making you care about the events unfolding. I like the later Hunger Game movies as much as anyone, but they never seem to be as intimately focused on the games as much, and the Ruse and Pitas we initially connected with become less and less enticing as characters to follow. Root for, care for, I'm looking at you, obnoxious camera girl and Mockingjay. You were just so not interesting and barely on screen. So, as much as I hate to take this story from a more unique kind of direction, we're going conventional with this one. The story is split into two stories, the story of the lost episode for the first episode in the series, and the story of the first episode of Season 2 for the rest of the story. Hopefully that makes sense, but basically the cast is split into two groups of 8. 8 for the lost episode and 8 for the Season 2 episode. While I didn't initially have enough characters, my sister also made a comic of her own as a kid, so we're adding in those characters as part of Season 2. Season 2 of the show within the show, by the way. I really hope you're following because I'm losing track now. But anyway, the Pilligaran Empire knew about mass disappearances following the release of each episode. Disappearances not connected to the battle royale that happens in the first round of each game. Because they were losing potential soldiers to the sinister game show, they decided to send in lesser-known guard members to find out what was happening behind the scenes. Basically, there's an espionage branch of the high military that disguises themselves as lower ranks and rookie types. For the lost episode, they sent in Belial, who never came back. For the Season 2 pilot, they sent in a new spy, and that's the mystery of the show. Who came into the show to uncover the truth from within? After the lost episode is shown in the first episode, the second episode and beyond would follow 3 different plots. The A plot would be the second set of contestants in the game, each of them realizing over time that there's a spy among them that's protecting them from elimination. The B plot would be about the 8 contestants from the lost episodes and the hell the game makers put them under. Their hierarchy system, their miserable lives, the PTSD flashbacks from the experiments would all be on full display, with the heart of the plot being Mamoru and Amadea trying to return to each other and lead a rebellion against the game makers. The C plot would be the game makers themselves and would have the least focus. The game makers' identities would be revealed over time, as would their hatred of their position of power and the motivations behind the experiments. So yeah, fun times all around. Lots of suffering, lots of enjoyable suffering, and a little bit too much like Squid Game, but I made this like 5 years ago, so obviously I own the rights to Squid Game based purely on semantics and not on any legal standing, clearly. But seeing as the drawings have been on screen for a while, clearly it's time for me to shut up and finish here. Thanks for all the support for the shorts I've been posting. They're super easy to make, and it's always fun to see what you guys are looking for from my channel. And admittedly, the last few weeks have been kind of rough from my work hours being really crappy sometimes, to my moped giving up and dying on me the first day of college. So your support has been a really nice silver lining for all of this. I know I've said this verbatim about 100 times already, like verbatims of my name or something. But seriously, thank you guys for everything, and I hope I can keep making videos and getting better at it for you guys. So, that's all I have to say, and this is V for Verbatim signing off until the next video. Take care, and be excellent to one another. Bye!